What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to the Nightmare Success In and Out podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares and set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with and others who survived their own nightmare. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that'll help you knock down some of the prisons you built up in your own mind. All right, we're back, folks. Nightmare Success In and Out. And I want to give a shout out real quick to Peter Meyerhoff. He was nice enough to connect me up with my guest here today, Carlos Vasquez. And, you know, when we talk about on this show, what happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? How do you adapt? How do you survive? What do you do with that? And Carlos's story fits so well into this program. I was just telling them before we got on. It's just a true transformation, inspirational story. Just a real quick recap. Carlos, he got sentenced to a 20-year sentence when he was 19 years old, and for robbery, got shoved into a maximum security. And even within all that, he got into the prison politics, became a shot caller on the yard. And through that time that he was in there and what he's doing now since he's got out, he's using all of that experience. He's become a popular motivational speaker. He's a coach. Before we get into all that, I want to introduce our new sponsor for the show, Auto Plaza Direct. And I don't know if anybody really likes to go, you know, for a couple of weekends, walking car lots. And then once you find the car, you spend 4 to 5 hours, you know, try to buy to that car. You know, it's kind of like a trip to the dentist. But I got to tell you, there's a new pain-free way of getting a car. It's Auto Plaza Direct. They're your personal car concierge. Just tell them the car you want, what you can pay, and they'll go find that car for you. They'll negotiate your best price, your best options, and they'll deliver that car to wherever you are. Go to autoplazadirect.com to get started with your personal car concierge, the new hassle-free way, the car buying experience you deserve. Auto Plaza Direct. Tell them that Brent from Nightmare Success sent you. So, folks, here we go. So, Carlos, welcome. So honored to have you on today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, Carlos, you're in Los Angeles. Is that where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in LA, from LA. I'm out here back in LA after I got out. So, yeah, that's where I'm at.
So tell me a little bit, because I can't imagine you did 17 years, you've been out 19 months, and you're already making a splash doing something that you're passionate about. You're going and speaking to kids. You've been back to the prison. I read that you were back in the prison like 90 days after you had been there, which we're going to get into all that because I can't imagine that soon back and what that was like. But give everybody a little taste of what Carlos was like as a kid growing up. What was your experience growing up as a kid?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, growing up, you know, I grew up, you know, like I guess you could say a regular kid. You know, I grew up in a good neighborhood with both my parents, my sister. It was a suburban neighborhood. You know, life was good. I never felt, you know, in danger. I never felt like mistreated. Everything, you know, felt good. I went to Catholic school, you know, went to church. We got straight A's in school, played baseball. You know, that was my passion. And
what position did you play, Carlos?
Catcher.
Catcher, man.
Yeah.
I'd put all that stuff on.
Yeah, catcher. Yeah, and my favorite player was Mike Piazza. You know, I looked up to him back then, and so yeah, and you know, playing baseball was like the first introduction I had to, like, you know, teamwork and the importance of it and leadership as well. That's where I kind of identified, you know, some like natural leadership within me, you know. And as a catcher, you got to like catcher and pitcher, I believe, are kind of leaders of the team.
Yeah.
When you're out there. So, but yeah, I grew up good. Everything was fine, but you know, everything changed. Like around 13 years old, my father left. He was the one person I looked up to most. He got up and left and walked out of our lives. You know, he created another family in secrecy, and it came out. And at the end of the day, he decided to go live the rest of his life with them. And that was like crushing, not only to me, but to my mother and to my sister. And, you know, the impact that it had on my mother and sister really impacted me. And, you know, they started to, you know, have their fights and blamed each other for why he left, even though it was none of their fault. My sister got pregnant when she was 16 years old. My mom had to take on 2 jobs. She was going through depression. We had to leave our neighborhood. We moved to a neighborhood that wasn't so good from the neighborhood that was really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran away. You know, it was the only way I knew how to deal with what was going on in my life. And so I ran away into the streets, you know, when I was 13 years old. And that's where everything changed. You know, I was homeless, you know, 14. By the time I was 14, I was homeless. I was sleeping in the back of a car in an apartment complex. I was addicted to drugs. I was doing crime, stealing, and then met gang members, and the gang members became like my father figures. You know, I was like one of them because most of them didn't have their fathers, or their fathers were in prison or dead. So they took me in, and although you know they showed me the wrong way to live. They showed me how to sell drugs. They showed me how to shoot. They showed me how to do all these things, but they took me in, you know, and they showed me the only love that I knew at that time. And so I became one. I became a gang member when I was 14 years old. And
when they took you
then,
in, Carlos, because you were homeless at the time, did they also give you a place to hang out and live and be with them?
mm-hmm. Well, yeah, like that was the thing. Like, you know, some of the gang members that I met were mostly older than me. And, you know, they were like, hey, you can sleep, you know, on the floor of my room, or even their parent, like their mother, or a lot of them were raised by their grandparents, was like, you know, yeah, you could sleep here tonight. And so that's what I was like, you know, kind of like, wow, like these are people that barely know me, but they understand what I'm going through, and they open their door for me. And so I felt like a sense, like I had to be loyal to them, you know, and that loyalty came through whatever I had to do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in the gang environment, you know, when you're loyal, you take a life, and you're willing to give your life. And that's the mindset that I had and that I had developed, you know. So yeah, they took me in and showed me how to survive, not just have a place to live, but showed me how to make my own money and do things to survive in the streets. So
did your when you were going through all this, because I mean you're just a teenager at the time, you know, I mean there's so many things, you know, teenagers are dealing with so many things when they don't have to deal with that. Did you have any connection back to your sister or your mom as you were going through all that?
yeah, I did. You know, I would go back there, and I would, you know, see them, and I would take my mother money because, you know, once I started to sell drugs and do robberies, I would take her money, and, you know, she would accept it. She knew what I was doing. And it was almost like she felt that she couldn't take care of me anymore. So that was the sense that I got. And then, you know, my sister, you know, she was like, she didn't want me around. I think because she had her kid, and then she had another kid right after that. And she knew my mother became like their parents, their mother, because she wanted to still go do her thing and party. So my mother took on the responsibility of them. So in a way, my mother couldn't handle me, like couldn't deal with me. So yeah, I would go through there, but it was never felt like home. You know, I always left, and I always knew my home was in the streets, and that's what I felt at the time. And but there wasn't, you know, a day that went by back then that I wasn't afraid in those streets. I just never showed it. But after a while, that fear just hardened me, you know, and I became callous, and but definitely had to put on my mask, you know, to survive, because if they really knew what I was feeling inside, I wouldn't have never made it. But yeah, like you know, your show, man, in that retrospect, it was a nightmare for me at first, and you know, still to this day, I'm surprised I made it to where I'm at today. Like,
I think it's what's so incredible about your story is that, first of all, you lived, you know, you made it.
Yeah.
Living in that world, you could have easily have died at a very early age. So I'm assuming that things just kind of progressed for you. You know, you got in to selling drugs, you got probably older and given more responsibility. And that was your family.
Yeah.
Can you lead us through when you got the big nightmare hit with the robbery and how that all went down for you?
Yeah. So I was, robberies and robbing banks and doing all those things became like a normal thing. And besides selling drugs and doing anything I could to get money, became like a normal thing. It was just keep doing it, keep doing it. You're getting away with it. Back then, you don't think about like consequences. And so, but there was one like person that came into my life when I was 16 years old. His name was Chris, and he was 3 years older than me, and he was like a big brother. He was really the one that showed me how to survive. He embraced me the most. We connected, like became like brothers. And when I was 16 years old, he committed suicide in front of me, and that like, that really changed me because I was already, in the streets, a gang member, violent, but that made me even more violent, and made me get deeper into drugs and kept me up because I couldn't sleep because of the nightmares, reliving that event over and over. When you see somebody die that close to you, that you're close to, like you just can't forget it, and it never goes away. And even today, it's like it's still with me, but I'm just strong enough to deal with it now. Back then, I wasn't, So that led me to become more violent, and with more violence, I wanted to do bigger crimes. So, I committed a home invasion, armed robbery, and the people that I robbed were drug dealers. And not to minimize it, it's not right regardless, but I was preying on anybody that I can, to try to excel myself out there in the streets and build my reputation and get the money that I wanted. So yeah, I committed a home invasion, armed robbery, and ended up getting sentenced to 20 years in prison, and not admitting what I did, taking the responsibility of what I did, and getting my 20 years and going to prison when I was 19.
Let's talk about that because that's a lot of time.
Yeah.
And as a kid at 19, um, was it an investigation and they found you and then brought you in, or did you get caught in the act and then you were arrested? And how did that moment happen when you finally got arrested for this crime?
Yeah, so well, I had, I was on the run for a jewelry store robbery already, and in the midst of being on the run, being hunted down, I committed the home invasion robbery. So, which actually made the news. So there was a lot of public exposure to it. So like I couldn't go anywhere. Like they were kicking in doors of everybody I knew. So I had to leave the state. So I fled to Arizona. I stayed out there with some people I knew, and for 9 months. And I went on the run, and the U.S. Marshals were looking for me, and they got me because one of my friends that already was in prison gave them information on where to find me, and they were able to locate me and find me. And I got into a high speed chase and got caught. And it's so crazy because I always knew, like I always had this thing that I was never going to go to prison, that I was going to shoot it out. And I used to roll around everywhere with my gun. And the day that I got caught, I didn't have my gun. I left it at my friend's house to go to the store briefly. And in that moment is when I got caught. And that's another thing. Like I always think about, like, had I had the gun, I wouldn't even be here today. So yeah, they put me in the police car, and they told me like I would never be free again. Literally told me that, like, this is the last time you'll ever see the streets again. And then they took me to jail and
What was going through your mind? What was going through your mind, Carlos, in the back of that car when that happened? What were you thinking? It had to be an adrenaline thing that you've just been through a car chase and they've got you and they've thrown you in the back of there and said, "Hey, this is it."
Yeah, a sense of relief, because being on the run is not easy. It's very stressful, it's challenging, and trying to navigate that way. So a sense of relief, but also like just I was angry because I let them catch me.
Yeah.
I felt at that time that I was angry about that. That I wasn't able to go out the way I wanted to go out. But all those emotions, and I went in as soon as I hit jail, it was like, okay, now it's time to change my mindset. It's a war zone now, because as a gang member, you walk in a place like that, it's a war zone. So that I had to shift. I had to stop thinking about all the what ifs and stuff and just focus on then and there and making it through there, and building the only thing I had left, which was my name and reputation.
So when you get to the day of, and the judge hands down 20 years. Were you thinking you were going to get 20 years?
No, I thought I was going to get life because the whole time that I was fighting my case, they was never offering me no plea deal. They always said you're going to get life because of the gang enhancement, because the kidnapping that was involved, because of the past crimes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you were done. You're struck out. You have multiple felonies. So, yeah, I was facing life the whole time that I was fighting my case for a year. And the only reason why that they offered me 20 years is because there was a big murder that had just occurred in Los Angeles at the time, and the judge had took on that case, and they wanted to just get me out of the way. That reason, and because the victims were, like I said, drug dealers. So I think they were feeling that they weren't going to show up, that they weren't going to be there. But it was a roll of the dice. Like if they showed up, then I get life. If they don't, then then I might potentially get off. So when they offered me 20 years, for me, it was almost like it was tough to take it. But in my mind, like I had already thought I was going to go away for the rest of my life. So yeah, so I took it, and yeah, and it was tough, but I wasn't even thinking that far ahead. I was like, let me just focus on making it one day at a time.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to do. I mean, there's no way, especially, we talk about this a lot, but, in prison, you can't look too far ahead. It's overwhelming,
right?
And it gets to be. But you get to 20 years, you get sentenced to a maximum security. Can you walk us through your day getting to that maximum security and what's going through your mind that this is going to be my new home?
Yeah. I mean, even from county jail, just people constantly telling me, like, as soon as you get there, you have to, immediately, earn your bones, like, so to speak. And just because, like, as a gang member going in as young as I was, it was like, you're going to have to do something, somebody's going to test you, somebody's going to want, so you have to go in there and first chance you get, prove that you're not somebody to be messed with. And so that was instilled in my brain before I walked in there. So that's the mindset I went in with. Plus I was, at that point, there was no longer like fear within me. I didn't care about my life. I didn't care about anybody else's life. I wasn't afraid anymore, like I used to be. And so I didn't care. And so it was like almost a sense of like, one thing about going to prison is like, it's a sense of like, just you wonder what's going to happen. Like, it's almost like an exciting feeling. Like when you were young, like I was, and didn't have nothing but just like a name and reputation to keep and build, and
yeah.
And you have that ego in play. So I walked in there with that mindset, and I was luckily enough to be placed in my first cellmate was a guy who had already been in there 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
He was a gang member as well. He taught me everything. Told me everything I needed to know to survive in there. And if it wasn't for him, who knows what would have happened. But yeah, and so I went in there, and first opportunity I had, I participated in violence to show everybody that, okay, this is somebody that's, if you don't mess with it,
yeah,
leave it alone. And yeah, and every chance I got, I did that. So.
Well, that's an incredible thing that you got with somebody that really showed you the ropes. And I think that,
Yeah.
Carlos, talking to a lot of different people who have gone to prison, more times than not, that seems like that happens. You don't know what to think when you walk through the gates, but
yeah,
it's interesting how, because I think jail's so much different than prison. Jail's so transitory. People in and out, but when you get to that prison world, you're living in that's everybody's society. And you have to figure out, you're in the survival mode of, okay, how do I live in this world? How do I make this work for me on a daily basis? So how did you make that work for you? What did you have? Because I know that your prison world and life changed as you were in prison. I mean, you went in hardened, went in, didn't care. So I'm sure those first few years were a lot different than the years that you were going through your transformation of who you are now.
Definitely. Like my first 10 years, I was worse than when I went in. I hated authority. I felt like the correctional officers and police officers were my enemy. And so I got in, a lot of altercations with them. But also, I also learned throughout that 10 years too that, that you have to abide by some type of rules, no matter where you're at in life. And even in there, what you do can, affect others. So, I learned that and like there was times when, the correctional guards would, threaten me, threaten to do. And back then, like what they would do is they would take a young guy or whatever, and put him in the cell with a rapist, and they were known for doing that kind of stuff. Or, when I was in Corcoran during the times when they were doing gladiator school, when they would set up like fights out on the yard, just one-on-one, and make bets on them and things like that. I was amongst all that. So I learned too that like you have to use your brain, you have to play chess in there. And I'm not the biggest dude. Like I'm not, you know what I mean? Like in prison, I was 170, I'm 200 now. And so the way I survived in there was all mental. Like it was just the mind, like me navigating myself, playing chess and organizing. And I think that's what like eventually made me a shot caller, is because it wasn't that I was the baddest killer in there, or that I was biggest dude and I had the most time. And it was all the mindset. And yeah, the mind helped me get through that. Like everything from me, like reading, from studying to writing, to like being able to maneuver through that world and survive, like using my mind. And at the last, always knowing that eventually you have to at some point get physical. That just comes with it. But I mean, there's people in there that get killed. There's people in there that get on drugs. There's people in there that get caught up in situations. And like the reason why I think I made it through those 10 years was because of that, just my mindset too. But I was still destructive. I was still, a really bad person, man. And yeah, for at least the first 10 years.
Well, being a shot caller on the yard, I mean, that's a whole different world, that's prison politics, it's different, it's all about respect. And it's, then you've got all these different layers of what happens within that world. And I'm sure in a maximum security, that's a hell of a lot different than a medium, a low, or a camp. But, what happened to you though? Because I in reading, it seems like I'm pushing this out there because I don't know if this is actually what transpired for you, but it sounded like you were put in the hole for a long time. And when you were in there, and I think you were in there for months, was that kind of your moment, or whatever that rock bottom moment is, that you came down to your soul to figure out that, hey, I got more to offer. I got more to do. What happened? How did it happen?
Yeah. So it was, I had been in, my 13th year in, about my 13th year in. I had been in and out of the hole multiple times while I was in there for months at a time. But I would still get out the same person, just worse sometimes, but it was a different time. It was 13 years in, and about 13 years in, and I went and I was put in solitary confinement, and I was back there for 3 years this time. But that was what changed me. And it wasn't even the 3 years, because I changed.
Are you saying you were in solitary confinement for 3 years?
Yeah,
that's a lot. That's a long time, Carlos. I mean, I can't even. In fact, I saw a movie because I saw guys that would go into the hole for a couple of months and it would come back looking different. You were in solitary confinement for 3 years. How did you survive that?
Well, that's what I mean. Like, it's crazy because 3 years, it is a long time, especially now that I'm free. But like, I was back there with guys who were back there for 20 years. And this was back before the big hunger strike that happened in California that got everybody out of the SHU. But there was guys back there for 20, 30 years, and nobody knew, nobody cared. And I met a lot of them back there. But so 3 years, like, it's a lot, but at the time when you hear that, it's really not. And so that does something to your mind. It kind of, which is why I know, like, but the 3 years for me, it was the time that, like, it pretty much, like, I want to say, like, it didn't break me, because if it would have broke me, then, I wouldn't be I felt that if it broke me, then I wouldn't be who I am today. But it it allowed me to like reflect on my life, and it allowed me to, discover what my purpose is. And that was the most important thing. And it happened back there. And it happened because I got to the point of suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I was just tired of living. I felt that I didn't want to be locked up anymore. I didn't want to be in solitary. I didn't want to live, like continue hurting people, because I'm hurting my mother. I was hurting my sister. I was hurting, people that looked up to me. I had an influence on people that were getting life in prison, because they wanted to do like what I was doing. And so I got tired of being that. And I wanted to, and I still had nightmares about Chris, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I wasn't getting help. So I came to the point of suicide. And like I tell everybody my story, it was like literally the day before I was going to do it. Like a man came up to my cell, and he was a chaplain, and every now and then a chaplain would walk around back there, and it was, or like nurses and stuff. But this chaplain came to my cell door, and he called me over, and he talked to me, and he challenged me to not give up, because he saw it in me. He saw something in me, and he gave me a Bible, and he told me to read. And it wasn't even like, it was really because somebody gave me their time and actually cared. That's what changed me, I think. Like, and that's why I do that now. I give my time to others, and I really care, because I feel that's so impactful.
It's,
Like,
I mean, that
yeah,
story right there, Carlos, is so powerful. You were a
yeah,
day away from taking your own life, and a chaplain ends up talking to you, and
yeah.
probably knowing where you were in your mind, and that moment changed. That's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. At that point, I just, I opened my Bible and I started reading it, and then, next day I started praying and reading, and then, the next day I started to just try to connect back to God, because I remember I had went to Catholic school when I was younger,
Yeah.
and so I was introduced to, religion, and then I lost it. But so I went back to it, and I looked for answers in there, and I started to read other books, and try to figure out what was going on within me, like how I got to that point mentally. And because I started to reflect back on who I was, and I'm like, how did this happen? And it was through that like introspection, through that, self studying, and through all that I started to discover, like, my change,
Mm-hmm.
and it started to transform myself, and then became confident, and started to have faith. And that helped me go back in the general population with this new mindset, because not knowing what was going to happen, that's like deadly. If you for some, like if you go out there, and for me, it was almost, I got stabbed twice when I got out of solitary confinement and went back to general population, because I changed. But I knew that was a part of it,
I
but
was going to
I
ask
didn't
you
care.
I was going to ask you, because it
Yeah,
had to be a heck of
yeah,
a because of the change, and your
yeah.
whole different mindset. I can't imagine the
Mhm.
type of reception you would have had, because it would have been a whole group of different people that you probably were talking to, but you were still probably hanging out with the people that you were with before you went into solitary.
Yeah, and nobody knew who I really was back there. How I changed, so everybody remembered me as the old me and how I was. And so when I got out, a lot of people get out of solitary and back in general population, and they, naturally you're going to be different, but then they fall right back into the same stuff, the negative stuff. But for me, they knew I was serious, and it wasn't like I was walking around, like I was better than anybody. Is I was just separating myself, and I was like focused on me, and I was like, taking myself out of situations. I didn't want to no longer be a shot caller to the destruction, and a lot of people don't like that,
Mm-hmm.
and so that happened, but I dealt with it, and I got stitched up in my cell by my friend, and I shook it off, and I got back out there, and I kept doing what I'm doing, and I didn't care, like whatever happened. And eventually, like when I first went in, you have to prove yourself. That was me proving myself that my change was real, and people started to respect that. And and it empowered others. I started organizing self-help groups, insight workshops, and like older guys that were like in there for life sentences that had been in there 20 years started to come to these groups, and we started to have conversions, and people were opening up, and people were actually wanting to change. It's just sometimes people need to be empowered by others to do it. Yeah. Right. That's what, and that's when I learned another thing about leadership is like leaders are, a real leader is just another follower. It's just, they may be a few steps ahead of everybody else, but we're all going toward the same mission. And so,
I think the other thing, Carlos, that's really interesting about that is that the other thing about leadership is that you have to be authentic, and they have to feel like you're passionate about it. They have to feel like you're vulnerable. And, it sounds like to me that when you came back, you had all those things lined up, and the people knew that. And when you put these groups together, I think it probably allowed those people to open up to that, because, people don't open up if they feel like somebody's going to think something about them or do something or whatever. And you must have had some aura about you that made people want to come, made people want to take their time and be in a group and try to improve themselves, which, you and I were talking beforehand, the prison world, it is one day at a time. You try to win that day, however you can. And then people always say, well, that's kind of weird saying you want to win the day in prison. But I think you either got to win the day in prison or win the day outside of prison. Whatever that is, there's always wins that you can find. But you were finding, when you came out of solitary, you were starting to find wins, and those wins were pulling people in, helping them. And that had to fill you up in a different way than you felt before.
Yeah, it was, that's when I knew okay, this is my purpose, to, inspire positive change in others every chance I get, and anybody, and so that's what I did. Any opportunity I could, any chance I got, I would work with people in there, whether they were people that had been in there for a long time or new guys coming in. I became a leading example, and like before, everybody already knew me for who I was before. And like you said, I think that was kind of that one thing that kind of allowed these people to feel comfortable to come to my groups and stuff, is because like they knew I wasn't just some guy who was like coming in that never did anything.
Right.
And so they look at the change for me was like so drastic that it was like they knew within themselves, no matter how bad they were, they can change. Like if I could do it, they can.
Well, no, it gives them hope. I mean, they were living with you. They knew who you were.
Yeah.
They knew how you were living your life. And by you coming and being a different person and helping people, mentoring people, that instills hope in people. They're like, oh my gosh, maybe I could change, and maybe I can better myself. People seeing that and then feeling it. That's so much of, that's why I was going back to the authentic and the passion and the vulnerability. People feel that. That's not something you teach people, because people say, well, people can be leaders good and doing good things, and people can be leaders doing bad things. But it's something that instills people that I want to follow that person, or I want to believe in that, or really I want to aspire to better myself in some way, whether they're going left or right,
Yeah. Exactly.
I just think it's always, I think it's so interesting when somebody who was living the life you were living, coming to that moment. I mean, what would have happened if that chaplain didn't show up? I don't know. I mean, what would have happened if you would have had a gun that day, when you're on the car chase? I don't know. But that's what's so interesting about how, lives have so many, forks. And, what happened if you go down this way or that way, and you chose a way to come out. So I'm trying to remember that when this started happening, how many years did you have left out of the 17 you were in with this change inside prison?
Yeah. So I had 4, once I got out of solitary confinement, I did 4 more years on the general population before I got out. So I was technically supposed to do the full 20 years. And at that time, before I changed, I had 20 years. Like even right now, like I wasn't supposed to be out right now. I was supposed to be out in 2024. That was my earliest possible release date. But the life I was living, I mean, the chances of me making it to that was very slim, because I probably would have got another strike and
Yeah.
spent the rest of my life in prison or whatever. But so technically, I always tell people, like, right now I'm out here, and all this time is like time that I didn't even have. Like,
Yeah.
at one point I didn't have this, and it came to me because I got out, and I finished high school, and I got a college degree. I became a mentor, and I earned that time. I earned that time off. So I got out 3 years earlier because I went out there and changed. And so that was another thing, like inspiring others to do that. Like, you can do good and you can do right, and you're going to see benefits from it. Right. Like 3 years, like, I don't know, that number three always fine. 3 years in the shoe, 3 years. I got out early. Like, man, so much could happen in 3 years. Right. I changed my life in less than 3 years. And I've been out here in less than 3 years, not even 2 years yet. And like, I've accomplished so much. So, like, every day counts,
Yeah.
like, every day counts, man. So
It's a big deal. And I can't imagine for you, Carlos, because you went in so young, when you finally, you've got, you get that post up that, you're leaving and this is your out date. What did you start thinking? What was going through your mind? I'm like, oh my God, I'm this far from the door.
yeah, it was almost like I had a mindset back then that you're not out till you're out, because I had seen so many people get so close to getting out and it didn't happen. Whether something like, I saw a guy get killed, a couple of months before he was going to go home, and so I just always used to tell myself and others that I really talked to and respected in there, that everyday type of people that I talked to, I'm out when I'm out. When the doors open up and they let me out, that's when I'm free. But right now I'm here, and I'm just going to continue doing what I've been doing. And like we said, go back one day at a time. And so I came out with that mindset. And since I've been out, I've been living like that, always looking forward, but living one day at a time, not dwelling on the past and who I was or my failures along the way, and, what I can't control, but more just focused on now. And it works for
Yeah.
me, it works. So that's what I continue to do. Yeah.
So Carlos, you step out, you finally get out, that day finally happens. What is that day? What happens that day when you get out 19 months ago?
Yeah, man, that's crazy. Yeah. Wow. It still shocks me when I think about it, like walking out, that feeling, it's like, so when I got out, it's just like a weight lifted off of me, like, I no longer have to deal with that life, but not really feeling fully free yet,
Yeah.
because I know that, I'm still have to get on parole, and I still have to, I don't know what's going to happen out there in the streets. I don't know who I'm going to have to deal with out there,
Yeah.
even though I'm moving, away from the area where I was, but it's not that far. I'm like, even now I'm like 45 minutes from there. So it's a small world. You
Yeah.
never know. So, but just, that in the moment, like living in the moment, just being able to hug my mom, and, as a free man, and as a
Yeah.
free changed man, and to be able to do what I always wanted to do when I was inside, which was to hear, her tell me that she's proud of me. And, and I've my biggest fear was always to, like, die in prison. And so now when people tell me like nothing, I'm okay, because my biggest fear is over. I don't, if I die out here, so be it. But like, I just never wanted to die in
Yeah.
prison. And I got out, and, I got to hear my mother tell me she's proud of me.
Yeah.
And I got to leave this earth doing something good, not be a destructive person in this earth, and be remembered as this gang member who
Yeah.
was doing all this bad stuff. So I'm at peace with that. And so every day I'm at peace, and I look at life as a gift, so, because I know, like, that so many different things could have happened for me not to be here.
Yeah.
And so that's, yeah. And so it's just
The other thing I
different.
think is interesting, because it's in your profile. You're a motivational speaker now. You get up. I've seen these, these
Yeah.
pictures of you in front of these huge stages.
Yeah.
So interesting, because that is a whole mindset change from you as a little kid,
Yeah.
being scared to get up in front of a class and speak, or if you knew you had to make a class presentation, you'd leave schools because you'd be absent from school that day because you didn't want that. And now you're talking about overcoming all these fears. That is a fear that you just stepped right over. I mean, you are a motivational speaker. You are going out and speaking to big groups, and what a voice to be able to be somebody that was afraid as a kid to step into this and that become your passion to speak to people. And tell me a little bit about what you've done here in the last 19 months, because I know one of the things that came up is that you had the opportunity to walk back into prison. And I think it was only like 90 days or so from you leaving prison. What was that like?
Yeah. So, when I first got out, I had to get a job, parole requires it to even get off parole. So I applied for a few jobs, but, got turned down because of my record and my past. And, an organization that actually helped me while I was in the Inside Partnership Reentry Program, they gave me a job, and so I started there, and with them and their connections, I was able to get back into the same prison 3 months after I got out, the same prison I walked out of, the same yard I walked out of, I walked back in 3 months later and was able to hug some of the same people that I just left on the yard, still on parole, and that was like a powerful moment for me and for them. And like literally like just changed like that was like the last thing that I felt like I really needed to do. I go back still to this day, like all the time, but it was going back so soon and seeing them, like I know that had such a great impact on them. And they always tell me, and because I promised them I'll be back, and I kept that promise, quicker than I even thought. But it just shows like that, anything's possible. So yeah, I went back in, and I've been going back in, and I go in there and I speak, and I go in there and I do workshops.
What's your message, Carlos, to those guys when you go back in?
My message just always like just, to never give up, never give up, and to figure out what your purpose is. Because once you figure out what that is, then every day you have a reason to get up in the morning, right? To figure out what your why is. What are you doing it for? Who are you doing it for? Because in prison, that helps you get through those days. So a lot of them don't ever sit down and think about that. They feel like they have no purpose. They have no reason to be here. But once I found out what mine was, that kept me alive, kept me from taking my life. So I always try to help them to figure that out, or to help, or to give them, different tools that I use to help figure that out. So it's always that, because, it's like only so, in prison, you're limited. You can only do so much, right?
Right.
So, and you can only have so much, you're limited, you can only do so much. But what I tell them is like, if you know what you want to ultimately accomplish here, every day you could work on that. Yep. Even if, let's just say you won't get out for another 10 years, just think every day, let's say in 10 years, you want to get out and you want to, own a business. Mm-hmm. So guess what? The next 10 years, you work on that. You work on what business you want to work at, you study, read, because eventually all that is going to help you. So that's the kind of the message that I help them with in there and keep their hope and inspire them, to show them that you can get out and be successful.
That's cool. And you go and speak to younger kids, and I know you've got the PRICE acronym that you use. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah. So, I was asked to go speak at Loyola Marymount University it's so crazy. A group of master's degree students and doctors asked me to come speak there. And, I have a degree in psychology, but I don't have a master's, or I don't have my PhD or nothing. But they asked me to come speak because they wanted to get like the perspective of like a criminal that changed, because like people get paid to try to like figure how that happens, like what can we do to change these mindsets and all that. So, I went in there, and before I went in there, I sat down, I thought about it, like, what did I need to like become successful, in life? Like what are the key things that I needed? And it always came back to the price of success, and then which is PRICE, which is, purpose, having a purpose, number one, and then creating a routine, that's in prison, that's everything. Your
Yep.
routine helps you get through the day,
Yep.
right? So the same thing, creating that routine, because that's going to keep you working on your purpose. Inspiration is having something to be inspired by every day,
Yeah.
right? So for me, like hearing other people getting out, reading stories about people who've overcome like crazy adversities, that was that inspiration, and then confidence, because once I had the confidence to go out there back in the general population with who I was, it was like, now I can actually go out there and I don't care what anybody says or thinks, right? And then the education part, the E, because you have to be a lifelong learner. You have to continue to educate. And for me, education like helped change my life. When I was back there reading and studying, that helped me figure out what was wrong with me,
Yeah.
and then how I can work on that and better myself. So I shared that with them and applied it how it worked in my life. So
They realized you did have a master's in life.
yeah, exactly.
No, that's
Exactly.
so
So
cool. I mean, that had to
yeah,
feel so good, Carlos, for you to put in all that time, and being in for 17 years and having a college say, "Hey, we want you. We want to hear you and want to hear your
yeah,
voice." And then you had so much to tell them. That's I think, we all go through all of these different experiences in our life. It's really how we use it. How do we use what we have to be able to make a difference? And I was so excited to talk to you because you've put all those different pieces together, and I can feel your vibe that you're just on this journey, taking these steps. I mean, you're in the jogging mode right now. I can see you in another year, you're
yeah,
sprinting, man. I mean, you're
yeah,
getting all these pieces in place, and they're all the right pieces. And you were practicing on it before you left, before you ever got out. And
yeah,
now you are fueling other people up now that you're out. And it's just, it's an inspiration because people like those type of stories, because the reason why is everybody, I always say this, people build up prisons in their own mind. The question is, how do you knock through it? Because it takes effort. It takes that, like you just said, everything that you just said, those are the things that allow you to, because fear is what keeps you from doing that wrong
yeah,
mindset that I'm not good enough. I've got a bad, experience with this, or, a bad job, bad wife, whatever all those things are.
mhm,
But you have taken all of that and fueled it, and you just step through it. You keep stepping through it. And that's some kind of magic ingredient that if we could put that in a bottle and send that out into the world, that's what people need. They need that, whatever that is, to keep stepping. As long as you step forward, you might fail, but you've learned
yeah,
something. And then you can continue to step forward because you won't make that mistake again. You're going to continue to step. And that's what's so inspiring about your story. You've taken all those pieces and you're pushing it forward. It's cool stuff.
yeah, yeah. Thank you, man. Appreciate that. Yeah,
So what's on the horizon for you, Carlos? Because I know you've got a lot of different things that I can see
yeah,
from your website. You've got a book you're
yeah.
working on. Looks like you're messing around a little bit with film.
Yeah, yeah. So, one of the things that I did inside to help me get through the time was write, and started off writing plays, and then I did screenplay writing, and it's something that I still do to this day. So I've written 8 plays, and for the
Love that.
playwrights project out of San Diego, and I actually teaching artists for them, and I work with the youth, and I go back in and teach workshops on that, and as a screenplay writer, as a freelance screenplay writer, I've written 2 screenplays that's already been produced, and they're being shown in all the prisons in New York are showing the films. And so now my next goal is to take it to the next level and not only write my own screenplay, but direct it. So I'm in the process of that, my own, starting off with a short film, and it's going to be a part of my life that, I don't really tell nobody, but like my brother, I have a younger brother who became a police officer while I was locked up inside. And, I hated authority. I hated police. And for a long time when I was in my ways, I didn't like him because he became that.
Hmm.
And we didn't talk the whole time I was in prison. And when I got out, I saw him in person and I hugged him, and it changed my whole worldview on him and police officers. And so I want to write a short film on that about, the power of having like a change of view on things, and how like sometimes, you can't judge somebody just because of what they become. Like there's good people in the world, no matter what job it is. And so I'm working on that, working on my book, trying to get that done.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, about the tools and the principles that I use to be able to make it through prison, to acquire the mental toughness to make it through the adversity and make it through the times when you feel like giving up, and the things that I feel that you need so that you could be successful. So that, and then continue to do my speaking, motivational speaking, and, working with the youth as a coach and mentor, working for different schools and organizations. So, which I was doing right before I contacted you. And then my next thing I'm going to do, and I was inspired because I've done so many of them, and I've been told to do a podcast.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah,
You'd be perfect for a podcast, and you deliver, your voice is so good, and the way you tell the stories. And, man, it's just, and I can tell you have a passion about everything you just talked about. I mean, I can see it in your eyes when you talk about it. That's the thing you want people to get, is that passion. And it's not easy. I know everything that you're doing is not easy. I mean, everything that you're doing, it doesn't happen overnight. You're doing it because you're passionate about it, and it makes you feel a certain way. And it makes a difference, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing,
thanks,
Carlos.
Thank you, man.
So I always ask people this, as we wind up an interview, after all this you've been through, and you've been through a journey here, Carlos, from a kid to where you are now. What do you think's your biggest takeaway for the listeners out there to know, that they need to know? Because you've said a lot of nuggets of wisdom in this podcast.
Mm-hmm. I would say to never underestimate the power of an individual, one man, one person or woman. Never underestimate that. Everybody matters, no matter who you are. And I say that because, like, all throughout my life, it's always been one person that's like altered my entire life. Whether it was, my dad leaving, whether it was Chris killing himself in front of me, whether it was that chaplain that came and gave me his time, or even Peter, being receptive to me and listening to me when I was 3 months out and I had nothing, but then sitting down with me and showing me what I needed to do out here to become successful. So like, never, underestimate one person. Like, so, and when you live that way, you value everybody, every person you encounter in life, you value them, and you listen to them. And, you may not do what they say, but you listen. And even if they're wrong, you learn from that.
Yep.
So just everybody matters. And so I think that would be the message.
That's great advice. Unbelievably great advice. And, in doing that, you don't judge a book by its cover, because you never know what that person is, that person could change your life. And I love it. For those out there, on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, any of those places, hit the follow button. It's a great thing. It helps the show, and it'll give you the next podcast that's out. Love the reviews on Apple. If you've got time to do that, that helps the show. It helps to promote the show. Leave me a message on BrentCassidy.com. I love to go back and forth. I want to give a shout out to all the guys that are in prison out there that are listening on Edovo. And, my book, Nightmare Success. If you're needing a book to read, Nightmare Success, you can get that on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Walmart. And as I used to say to my people as I was typing back and forth in prison, stay strong, and I'll do the same. Carlos, thank you so much. Appreciate this.
Thanks, man. I appreciate you. Totally.
All right, man. Nightmare Success, in and out. We'll see you.